You're standing in your kitchen. Your phone rings. It's two detectives. They tell you your parents were murdered 42 years ago. You had no idea. You've been missing since you were an infant. But here's the thing. You weren't hiding. You were living your life, raising 5 kids, working at a deli in Oklahoma. You just didn't know who you really were. This is what happened to a 42-year-old woman named Holly in June 2022. And the story of how she got there? It involves a brutal double murder, a doomsday cult that believed their leader was Jesus Christ reincarnated, and 2 women in white robes who abandoned a baby at a church in the middle of the Arizona desert. The question isn't just what happened to Holly's parents. The question is, how does a baby disappear for 4 decades, and who made sure she stayed hidden? Let's go back to where this nightmare started. It's 1979 in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, a small beach town where everyone knows everyone. Tina Gail Lynn is 15 years old when she meets Harold Dean Clouse Jr. Everyone calls him Dean or Junior. He's 19, a talented carpenter with steady hands and big dreams. Their romance moves fast, maybe too fast. But when you're young and in love in a small town, the future feels limitless. They get married at the Volusia County Courthouse on June 25th, 1979. Tina is 16, Dean is 20, and then on January 24th, 1980, their daughter is born, Holly Marie Clouse. Friends and family say they were devoted parents. Dean worked hard. Tina doted on Holly. They sent letters back home, included photos of Holly learning to stand, learning to smile. Normal stuff. They're the kind of moments that families treasure. But Dean wanted more opportunities. The construction boom in Texas was calling. Dallas-Fort Worth was exploding with new developments, and Dean was an expert cabinet maker. So in the summer of 1980, they packed everything up and moved to Lewisville, Texas, a suburb just north of Dallas. For a while, things seemed fine. Dean landed a good job. They had a small place. The letters kept coming. Photos of Holly, updates about work. Everything you'd expect from a young family trying to make it. And then, in October 1980, the letters stopped. No phone calls, no updates, just silence. Dean's mother, Donna Casasanta, tried calling. Nothing. She wrote letters. No response. Weeks turned into months. At first, she thought maybe they were just busy. New baby, new city, new job. But by late 1980, and the silence was suffocating, something was very, very wrong. January 12th, 1981. A dog comes home to its owner in Harris County, Texas, just north of Houston. The dog is carrying something in its mouth, a decomposed human arm. The owner is horrified and calls police. Investigators follow the trail into a swampy, wooded area. What they find there is the stuff of nightmares. 2 bodies, a man and a woman, badly decomposed. They'd been dead for about 2 months, which means they were likely killed sometime in late 1980, the exact time Dean and Tina stopped calling home. The man had been bound with his hands behind his back. He'd been beaten so severely that investigators knew he suffered before he died. The woman had been strangled. Both were left in the woods like garbage, just feet from each other. But here's what made this even more chilling. There was no identification, no wallets, no IDs, nothing. Just 2 nameless bodies in the Texas woods. They became known as the Harris County Does, John Doe and Jane Doe. Investigators tried everything. They created clay facial reconstructions. They put out bulletins. They searched missing persons reports. But without names, without fingerprints that matched anything in the system, the case went cold. And the baby? Holly? There was no sign of her, no body, no evidence she'd even been there. For all investigators knew, this couple didn't have a child. So the Harris County Does were buried in anonymous graves. 2 people, 2 lives, erased from history. Their families, hundreds of miles away in Florida, had no idea they were dead. And the worst part? Dean's family was still waiting for a phone call that would never come. It's early 1981. Donna Casasanta hasn't heard from her son in months. She's desperate, terrified. She can't sleep. Every time the phone rings, she jumps. And then one day, it does ring. A woman's voice. Calm, almost robotic. She introduces herself as Sister Susan. She says she's calling from Los Angeles. She says Dean and Tina have joined a religious group, a nomadic community that believes in giving up all material possessions and cutting ties with the outside world. She says they don't want contact with their family anymore. They've renounced their former lives. Donna is stunned. This doesn't sound like her son. But Sister Susan is insistent. She says the group wants to return the family's car. It belonged to Donna, but they need money in exchange. The car is in California, and the group can't use it. Desperate for any connection to her son, Donna agrees. She arranges to meet at the Daytona International Speedway. She brings family members, they bring cash. And that's when things get even stranger. 2 or 3 women show up. They're barefoot, wearing long white robes. They look like nuns, but wrong somehow. Off. Their eyes are glazed. They speak in a rehearsed, monotone way, like they've been told exactly what to say. They hand over the car keys. They repeat the same story. Dean and Tina have joined the group. They don't want contact. They're devoted to their new faith now. The family calls the police. Officers arrive and briefly detain the women. But here's the thing. No police report from that day has ever been found. It's like it never happened, and the women vanish back into the ether. Donna gets her car back, but she's left with 1,000 questions and a gnawing dread in her stomach. Because deep down, she doesn't believe it. This doesn't feel like a choice Dean would make. She just doesn't know yet that Dean and Tina are already dead. So who were these people in white robes? What kind of group convinces young parents to abandon their baby and cut off their family? The answer is a doomsday cult called the Christ Family, and it's one of the most extreme groups to come out of the 1970s. It all started with a man named Charles Franklin McHugh. After 2 failed marriages and a collapsed business, he went into the Arizona desert in the early 1960s for what he called a spiritual retreat. He stayed for 40 days. When he came out, he claimed he'd had a revelation. He was the second coming of Jesus Christ. He changed his name to Lightning Amen, and people believed him. At its peak, the Christ Family had about 2,000 members. They wore white robes, walked barefoot everywhere, refused to use leather. They called it dead animals. The men sometimes wore baby diapers tied around their heads like turbans. They were strict vegetarians. They abstained from sex. They renounced all material possessions. But here's the contradiction. They smoked marijuana openly, calling it God's tranquilizer, a sacred herb given by God. Lightning Amen was a harsh, manipulative leader. Cult experts who studied the group say he twisted Bible verses to control his followers. He demanded absolute loyalty. And he had a specific rule that made the Christ Family particularly dangerous for families. children were excess baggage. Rick Ross, a cult expert who worked with the FBI, explains it like this. If you're running a nomadic group, you want people to be mobile, devoted. Children are a distraction. They need to be fed, cared for, possibly schooled. So Lightning Amon's solution was simple: get rid of them. Former members describe a brutal existence. They traveled across the Southwest, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, sleeping in parks, panhandling for food, sometimes eating out of dumpsters. They called this lifestyle being in the wind. But beneath the surface of spiritual devotion, Lightning Amon was running something much darker. In 1985, 10 members were arrested for cultivating nearly $1 million worth of marijuana at their compound in Hemet, California. In 1987, Lightning Amon himself was convicted of possessing and transporting methamphetamine, carrying a concealed weapon, and possession of a hypodermic needle. He was also found with $30,000 in cash. He tried to flee with some followers, but was captured and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The group disbanded shortly after. Without their Messiah, the Christ family fell apart. Lightning Amon died in 2010 at the age of 73, but the damage he'd done would echo for decades, because investigators believe Dean and Tina Clouse were members of this cult, and they believe the cult is connected to their murders. Whereas here's the theory that investigators have pieced together. Dean and Tina moved to Texas in the summer of 1980. At some point, maybe through work, maybe through chance, they encountered members of the Christ family. The group was active in the area, panhandling, recruiting. Maybe Dean and Tina were vulnerable. Young parents in a new city, struggling to make ends meet, looking for a community. The Christ family was good at targeting people like that. But here's where it gets dark. If they did join the cult, they would have been expected to follow the rules. Give up all possessions. Cut ties with family. Separate from their child. But maybe Dean and Tina couldn't do it. Maybe they saw the truth about Lightning Amon and wanted out. Holly herself, now an adult, has said she believes her parents were murdered because they tried to leave the group. And there's evidence to support that. When the bodies were found, Dean and Tina were together. Their bodies were just feet apart. That's significant. The Christ family enforced strict separation of men and women. Members lived apart, traveled apart. If Dean and Tina were found together, it suggests they'd broken away from the group's control. Cult expert Dr. Stephen Hassan points out that leaving a high-control group like the Christ family often meant danger. If you knew too much about the drug trafficking, the manipulation, the abuse, you became a liability. And Lightning Amon didn't let liabilities walk away. So the theory is this: Dean and Tina tried to leave. They were murdered to keep them silent. And their baby, Holly, was taken and abandoned at a church because children were excess baggage. But without concrete evidence and without witnesses willing to come forward, it remains just a theory. The murders of Dean and Tina Clouse are still unsolved. For 40 years, the Clouse family lived in a nightmare. They didn't know if Dean and Tina were alive or dead. They didn't know if Holly was safe. They clung to hope, but hope is a fragile thing when you have no answers. Donna Casasanta, Dean's mother, prayed every single day. She kept photos of Holly, the baby she'd only seen in pictures. She kept a painting commissioned of the family, Dean, Tina, and baby Holly together, a family frozen in time. She reported them missing in 1981. But without leads, without bodies identified, there was nothing police could do. Meanwhile, 2 unidentified bodies lay in a Texas cemetery. John and Jane Doe, forgotten, and somewhere in the world. And a baby named Holly was growing up with no idea who she really was. In 2011, something changed. The bodies of the Harris County Does were exhumed for DNA testing. The science had advanced enough that investigators thought they might finally be able to identify the victims. But even with DNA, the case stalled. For years, the samples sat in databases, waiting. Then, in 2021, a team of forensic genealogists with a company called Identifinders International took on the case. Their names were Misty Gillis and Allison Peacock, and they specialized in a cutting-edge technique called investigative genetic genealogy. Here's how it works. They take DNA from unidentified remains and upload it to public genealogy databases, sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe. Then they build family trees. Not just one generation, but dozens. They trace cousins, second cousins, distant relatives, and work backwards to identify the victim. It's painstaking work. But Gillis and Peacock were relentless. In just 10 days, they found a match. The John Doe was Harold Dean Clouse Jr. The Jane Doe was Tina Gail Lynn Clouse. On January 12, 2021, exactly 40 years to the day their bodies were discovered, Dean and Tina finally got their names back. When the genealogists called the Clouse family in Florida to deliver the news, there was relief, heartbreak, grief, but also a new wave of panic. Because if Dean and Tina were dead, what happened to baby Holly? The Texas Attorney General's office immediately formed a task force. If Holly was alive, they needed to find her, fast. The first clue came from Holly's birth records. But when investigators tried to access them, they hit a wall. The records were sealed. And that meant one of 2 things. Either Holly had a juvenile criminal record unlikely for an infant, or she'd been adopted. Adoption meant hope. It meant Holly could still be alive. Senior counsel Mindy Montford and her team worked across state lines, Florida, California, Arizona, Oklahoma, following a trail of sealed records, adoption papers, and decades-old church documents. And then they found her, Holly Marie Clouse, alive, safe, living in Oklahoma. She was 42 years old, a mother of 5. She worked at a deli. She had a husband, a family, a normal life. She had no idea she'd been missing. June 7th, 2022. Holly's shift at the deli. She's hustling, prepping sandwiches, taking orders. It's a normal Tuesday, and then 2 people walk in. Suits, badges, guns visible on their hips. Senior counsel Mindy Montford and Detective Craig Holloman from the Louisville Police Department. They ask to speak with her privately. Holly's heart is pounding. She's thinking, what did I do? Am I in trouble? Did something happen to my kids? They sit her down. And then they tell her, your birth name is Holly Marie Clouse. Your biological parents were murdered in Texas in 1981. You've been missing for over 40 years, and your family has been searching for you this entire time. Holly can't breathe. She recalls thinking, are you serious? This can't be real? But it is real, and the detectives want her to meet her biological family today, right now, over Zoom. Holly agrees. Because what else do you do when your entire identity shatters in an instant? Hours later, she's staring at a screen. HUN on the other side are faces she's never seen but somehow look familiar. Her grandmother Donna Casasanta, her aunt Cheryl Clouse, her aunt Sherry Lynn Green, cousins, an entire family tree that's been missing a branch for 42 years. Donna is crying. She's waited more than 40 years for this moment. She says, "We never gave up on you." Holly, tears streaming down her face, says, "God kept me safe and protected all these years. I just want you to know that." It's an impossible moment, joy and grief colliding. Because Holly has been found, but Dean and Tina never will be. Cheryl Clouse later said, "I believe Tina is finally resting in peace, knowing Holly is reuniting with her family." Sherry Green said, "I personally am so relieved to know Holly is alive and well and was well cared for. But I'm also torn up by it all. Because this isn't a fairy tale ending. This is a miracle wrapped in tragedy. So how did Holly end up in Oklahoma, safe and loved, with no memory of her biological parents?" Investigators pieced together the timeline. Sometime in late 1980, right around the time Dean and Tina were murdered, two women appeared at a small church in Yuma, Arizona. They were barefoot, wearing white robes. They were carrying a baby. The pastor's name was Philip McGoldrick. The women told him they were part of a nomadic religious group that believed in the separation of the sexes, vegetarianism, and renouncing material possessions. They said their beliefs prevented them from raising children. They handed over the baby, Holly Marie Clouse. They also gave McGoldrick a birth certificate and a handwritten note, and allegedly signed by Dean Clouse, waiving parental rights. Then they disappeared. McGoldrick and his wife had been praying for a child. They saw Holly's arrival as an answer to prayer. They legally adopted her. They raised her with love. They had no idea she was connected to a double murder. Holly grew up safe, loved. She had no reason to question her origins. She had a family, a normal childhood, 5 kids of her own. She was living proof that sometimes, even in the darkest stories, there are pockets of light. But she also had no idea what had been stolen from her. In November 2022, Holly met her biological family in person for the first time. She flew to Florida. She embraced her grandmother, Donna. She met aunts and uncles and cousins who'd been waiting decades for this moment. And said, "I couldn't believe that so many family members had been waiting to meet me," Holly said in an interview with ABC News. "I am so wonderfully blessed to have a loving, faithful family to embrace as we meet again after 41 years. My heart is overwhelmed with joy and sadness." Because that's the reality of this story. It's not just joy, it's grief. For the parents she never knew, anger at the people who took them from her, confusion about the cult, about the women in white robes, about how her life could have been so different. Holly has since written a memoir titled Finding Baby Holly, Lost to a Cult, Surviving My Parents' Murders, and Saved by Prayer. In it, she writes, "Is there some link between these groups and the disappearance and murder of my parents? Are they villains in my story or heroes?" It's a question she may never have a full answer to, because the investigation is still ongoing, and the people who know the truth aren't talking. Here's what we know for certain. Dean and Tina Clouse were murdered in late 1980. Dean was beaten and bound. Tina was strangled. Their bodies were dumped in a wooded area north of Houston. Their baby was taken and abandoned at a church in Arizona by members of a nomadic religious group matching the description of the Christ family. But no one has ever been charged. The Christ family officially disbanded in 1985 after Lightning Amen went to prison. But some members still exist. In fact, as of the early 2000s, there were still 3 people living at the Christ family compound in Hemet, California: Gary Christ, John Christ, and a woman named Chris Miller. And when reporters contacted them after Holly's discovery, they claimed they'd never heard of Dean and Tina Clouse. Investigators have not publicly named the Christ family as suspects, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The white robes, the barefoot women, the timing, the cult's presence in Texas and Arizona, the note-waving parental rights, likely coerced or forged. And yet, without a confession, without physical evidence linking specific members to the crime scene, the case remains cold. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has said his office's cold case and missing persons unit is actively investigating. They're urging anyone with information to come forward. But time is running out. The people who were in the Christ family in 1980 are now in their 60s and 70s. Some are dead, others have scattered. Or the truth about what happened to Dean and Tina Clouse may be locked in the minds of people who will never speak. Out of this tragedy, something meaningful has emerged. The Clouse and Lynn families, along with genealogist Allison Peacock, have formed a nonprofit organization called Genealogy for Justice. Their mission is to use investigative genetic genealogy to identify other victims, people like Dean and Tina who were left nameless for decades. Donna Casasanta said, "I hope people will realize that it can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, how rich you are, how poor. We are helping other people who've lost loved ones that have been missing for a long time." Their first success came on Mother's Day 2023, and when they identified a 1982 Jane Doe from South Carolina as Virginia Higgins Ray, a woman from North Carolina whose family had been searching for her for 41 years. Dean and Tina's legacy is giving other families answers. Closure. The gift they never had until 2021. So here's where we started. A woman named Holly gets a phone call that shatters everything she thought she knew about herself. But here's the question we still don't have an answer to. Who killed her parents? Was it Lightning Amen himself, one of his followers? Was it a punishment for trying to leave? Was it about drugs, money, or control? And here's the even darker question. How many other families were destroyed by the Christ family? How many other children were abandoned? How many other bodies are still out there, unidentified, after waiting for someone to give them their names back? Holly Marie Clouse was the miracle, the one who survived, the one who got to reunite with her family. But Dean and Tina Clouse are still waiting for justice. And until someone comes forward, until someone breaks the silence, the people who murdered 2 young parents and stole their baby's childhood will continue to walk free. The investigation is ongoing. If you have any information about the murders of Harold Dean Close Jr. and Tina Gail Lynn Clouse, contact the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, because somewhere out there, someone knows what happened. And maybe, just maybe, they're finally ready to tell the truth.
Like and subscribe.